So this piece was kind of written, it was written about 2 years ago, and it was just out of genuine frustration of trying to heal from FGM and figuring out how to navigate in a particular way. So I underwent it when I was 9 years old, but I did not see it as trauma until I was about 19, because during that time, or during that like whole gap of not processing it as trauma, it was not necessarily normalized. It was just wasn't spoken about at all. So I was kind of just under this assumption that this is something that like Muslim women just have to go through and we just don't speak about it. And it wasn't until college where I found out that wasn't true. Most Muslim women don't undergo it. Most Indonesian women don't undergo it. Most people with vaginas don't undergo it under those identities. It was a very specific thing that happened to me amongst like my family lineage. So I tried to find resources for myself, and I tried to find either like just understanding what exactly it was or trying to find counseling services for it. But every time I looked up something, it was just headlines on headlines on headlines of just very like Western media that like centered it around like this very like xenophobic and Islamophobic lens, and kind of just calling like FGM and like the communities that are associated with it, like calling them savage, calling them like barbaric, calling them like all of these things. And it felt so difficult to feel as though by seeking help, I was betraying my community, but also like by me defending my community, there was this assumption that I was defending the practice, and that wasn't the case whatsoever. So I wrote this piece mainly just out of frustration of just like not being able to find what I needed, because I felt as though in either community, whether that was like my own or whether it's like the Western patriarchal society, my body was weaponized in a particular way to fuel a certain agenda. And I was sick of it. And I was just tired of it. And like, I also like was still in pain and was still traumatized. And when you take away the viewpoints, and when you take away like the notions of it and the notion of like the vagina and like any body that's associated with the vagina, like I'm still a traumatized person. I'm still a person with long-term damage. I'm still a person that like had to navigate sexuality in a way that was completely on my own. So that was pretty much the whole point of it, of kind of being able to have narrative and reclaim my own story and talk about what happened to me openly, but also still giving a preface that this isn't the time for white liberal media to come and use me as either like someone to pity on or someone to kind of push their own like very racist ideologies either. So one of the main things is that it's not tied to religion or culture in any way. So historically, the origins are very unknown. However, statistically, amongst every racial and religious group, it's pretty much the same amount of people. Like even within the US, like white women in the Midwest, there's a huge epidemic of like them undergoing FGM in the same ways under the church and like things along those lines. Not kind of like using that, but also like it's not tied to any particular thing. It's just that Western media has like made it seem that way, but statistically, like it's always kind of been the same amount of like socioeconomic and like ethnic groups for the most part. It's like around the same amount. The other things are like, it doesn't, and it depends on the type of FGM that you undergo, because there are different types. But depending on it, you are still able to be sexually active. You're still able to undergo sex and have sexuality. And also like what the presence of a clitoris has not stopped a person, has not like changed the fact that like people with vaginas like don't orgasm during sex. It's usually the other partner and not like anything regarding those matters. And then the other aspect is that like a lot of us aren't girls or women. Like I am a non-binary survivor of FGM and I do not identify as a woman, but like womanhood is so tied to us that like one of the problems with healing especially, or like finding counseling services, is that like it is only catered to girls and women, and it kind of gives this assumption of cis womanhood that like of course, obviously, that trauma does come with like cis hetero notions of cis womanhood. But that being said, like not all of us are women and girls. I would say to them that like first, I'm sorry that like we're under this guise that like we need to be controlled, and I'm sorry that from the beginning we were thought our bodies could not be trusted. But I will say, however, you feel afterwards and how you process afterwards and what you need to do in order to process that is super valid, and that like it is completely understandable like how you feel and what you need to do to heal in order for them to do so. I will also say there are counseling services. There are free counseling services. They are very hard to find, and you might have to go to the third page when you Google FGM survivor counseling services. You might have to go to the third page. But if there is a tangible org, I would heavily suggest Sanctuary for Families. They're super helpful. I'm not sponsored by them in any way, but they helped me a lot with my process. And I can trust that they will help other survivors of FGM and genital mutilation.